Welcome to Laugh, Cry, or Die, a comedy disability podcast hosted by two human trash bags full of craptitude. Today, we are joined by a special guest, Dr. Jo Prendergast.
Hello, and thank you for having me on the podcast.
Today, we're going to be asking the question, is Joe a spaz? More comedy shows need more DJ air horns. This is a true story.
Absolutely. I think it's the mark of a good comedy show. I'm going to now include it somewhere in my Cancer and Cartwheels show now that it seems to be a compulsory item.
So, Joe, welcome to Laugh, Cry, or Die. Have you laughed, cried, or died?
So far, I've avoided dying as far as I know. Definitely laughed and cried, probably in about similar proportions, even though I see a lot of comedy shows. It takes a lot for me to laugh out loud. So, you've definitely got a good joke if you make me laugh out loud.
I am such a bitch now. I watch so many specials, and if one manages, I'll smirk and I'll smile and I'll have a great time. Yeah, I'll be like, hey. But if I actually get a I'm like, oh, that's funny.
Don't you find though that you laugh more when there's other people in the room?
Oh,
it's a shared experience.
Yeah, there's definitely a contagious effect, I think. Well, like if you think back to school days, if one of your friends starts giggling in class, then there's like this domino effect around the classroom until everybody's rolling around in their chairs and falling on the ground.
I love that when you absolutely lose it and the slightest thing will just make you laugh even more. And it's in situations where you're not allowed to laugh.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So much worse. I love
that's what makes it worse. Like corpsing is vicious.
Yes.
There was that documentary, The Aristocrats. Did you ever see that? Ever hear that? So The Aristocrats is a mostly, I think, North American stand-up tradition where you take it's kind of like a hazing thing where you take a new comic and you tell them the filthiest joke about this family auditioning for this talent agent. And the punchline is, it's called The Aristocrats. And they made a documentary where they got loads of comics, including people who even weren't comics, like the South Park guys, and they made all 50 different versions of this Aristocrats joke and showed it for 2 hours. And if you were in the right audience that was laughing, it was the funniest thing that ever happened. Like it just took one voice in the audience to really set everyone off,
That's why I like coming to your shows and being a professional whooper. I'm quite happy to be the first person who makes noise, because as soon as somebody breaks the silence, other people will quite happily whoop or laugh or cheer.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a very strong whooper. Like I do a lot of whooping, and I also do a lot of spontaneous applause breaks that have now become almost a bit of a reflex. If I like a joke, I go. And it sounds slightly patronizing, but that is actually my version of that was a really good joke. Well done. But it's kind of, how some people kind of do that if they think something's a bit lame. So it may come across that way, but that's my version of appreciation, is to do kind of awkward applause. So I'm trying to break that and learn how to laugh instead. But yeah, most of my laughter is over kind of silly rubbish as opposed to a beautifully formed joke, which is where the applause comes out.
Well, luckily, there's nothing beautifully formed about our jokes on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So I've laughed quite a lot already.
So, Joe, you're a doctor of medicine?
Medicine, yeah. So doctor of medicine. So actually, I only realized very recently that I have a double degree, because I didn't actually realize that medicine was a double degree until I looked closely at my 1992 degree on the wall and kind of went, hey, it's a Bachelor of Medicine and a Bachelor of Surgery. Fancy that.
Ooh, I'm even more clever than I thought I was.
Decades later, I realized I've got a double degree, and it kind of, well, that makes sense. It was 6 years. Okay. But yeah, so apparently I have a double degree in medicine and surgery, but wow. Don't trust me with a scalpel would be my take-home message.
Have you done surgery?
Yeah. In my medical elective in Western Samoa, I did surgery. So I did a fair bit of suturing up people and things there. But yeah, I've pretty much tried to avoid surgery for my entire career, hence becoming a psychiatrist as my medical specialty, that the talking to people rather than touching people is my jam when it comes to medicine.
Which is scariest, getting right into somebody's guts and slicing them, or getting right into their brain and seeing the darkness in there?
The guts. Yeah, I figure I can handle pretty much anything that people would disclose to me now. I figure the deepest, darkest kind of corners of people's minds I've probably kind of experienced multiple times over my career, whereas doing anything with veins, arteries, or essential parts of bodies with a scalpel does not feel like it's in my area of knowledge.
Yeah,
Right.
I guess if you're giving bad advice, they're a bit more sad versus literally killing them to death.
Yeah, you can also make kind of the wrong call in psychiatry as well, particularly with safety assessments, but it's kind of acknowledged that that's an imprecise science, whereas if you slice through somebody's kind of femoral artery, it's regarded as poor form as a surgeon.
Fair
So,
enough.
so Jo, you are obviously very funny and you're a stand-up comic. So how long have you been doing comedy for?
My parents would probably say since the moment that I could utter some noise, I was kind of renowned for putting on shows for anybody who would watch since the time I could kind of waddle around and make noises. So, but in terms of officially, I probably moved into, I mean, I did sketch comedy and things all the way through school and through medical school, was in a sketch troupe and did med review and things. And then when I was living in Sydney, discovered the joys of theatre sports and improv. So did that for a while and then moved into long form improv, doing musicals and plays and things like that with a comedic genre. And then was doing quite a lot of comedic characters on screen. And a comedy producer said to me, hey, you should try stand-up comedy. And I went, absolutely not. And a few weeks later, I was doing a first-timers stand-up comedy show, and that went reasonably well. So I kind of went, maybe I'll keep going on this. And I think because it's such a challenge doing stand-up comedy, and you also get immediate feedback from the audience of whether you're on target in your art form or not, it became this sort of challenge to see if I could make stand-up comedy work, and also enjoyed it a lot. So that was 2017 that I did my first comedy set, almost to the day. And so have been doing it since, with kind of some scenic pauses for things like COVID lockdown and having breast cancer treatment. But other than that, I'm sort of around 7-8 years. I can't quite remember. Not very strong at maths, but especially since chemotherapy, the ability to do simple arithmetic has left my brain. So
Tell us about your breast cancer. When did you get diagnosed with that?
I found a lump in my boob and my armpit. It was 5 months after a reportedly normal mammogram. And I was aware that I had extremely dense breasts and did kind of raise at the time whether I should be having other forms of imaging rather than just a mammogram, but was told, oh no, all good. And had kind of pain around my kind of rib area just below my boob for a few months. And was sort of rubbing my ribs one night and kind of went, seems to be a marble in my boob just above that area. And then the next morning kind of felt into my armpit and felt a big marble in there as well. And so went along to the GP and kind of went, have a feel of these two things. Can I have some imaging, please, to check what's going on? And yeah, so it came back as grade 3, stage 2 breast cancer. And so went on the treatment regime of having surgery, then chemotherapy, then radiotherapy, and I'm now on hormone blockers for 5 to 10 years to try and stop estrogen feeding any stray cancer cells. So reasonably long haul kind of, and because I had all the lymph nodes taken out from under my armpit, I've got sort of neuropathy and paresthesia. So the answer is, am I a spaz? Is my right arm is kind of heading in that direction with various neurological kind of things going on, thanks to kind of having to chop 3 nerves to get all my lymph nodes out. So, and a lifelong risk of my arm blowing up with lymphedema. So I've got
exciting,
kind of exciting times. So kind of long-term disability, thanks breast cancer. But I'm very lucky that most of my disability is localized into one arm as opposed to more widespread.
And so when they did surgery, did they get everything and the chemo and radiotherapy was like to kind of target just in case, or was it like surgery didn't?
Yeah, so the surgical margins were a little bit marginal, but it was felt that it was because of the type of surgery I had, which was a special form of kind of plastic surgery while they take the lump out, where they move everything around and try and make the boob look as normal as possible. It's then quite difficult to kind of go back and work out kind of where the edge of that taking the tumor out is, because it's all sort of gone walkabout a bit around the boob. And the chemo was mainly because it had gone to my lymph node, and I was premenopausal when I got breast cancer, which increases the risk of it coming back because you've still got plenty of estrogen pumping around the body. So the chemo was kind of trying to kind of mop up any stray cancer cells that might be lurking around. And then the radiotherapy is basically to kind of blast that whole area in case there were some kind of stray bits of cancer that weren't picked up during surgery.
And how was chemo? Like, obviously, like, chemo's crap and makes people feel crap. How bearable was that? Because I've heard people go, oh, I'd rather just take what comes and not have the chemo.
Yeah, it was a mix. I had quite an intense chemo that was every 3 weeks, and the first 2 were remarkably okay. Like after, certainly by a week after chemo, I was feeling pretty good, and then by kind of week 3, I was feeling pretty much normal. So I kind of had quite a quick bounce back. But by the 3rd round of chemo, it took me a good 6 weeks to be anywhere near kind of my normal baseline. And there was certainly, in that first week, I could barely kind of walk from my bed to the bathroom, let alone kind of walk around outside and things like that. So it really sort of hit me hard that 3rd round, but the first 2 were better than I thought it would be. So, and I was, I don't know whether proactive or verging on a bit neurotic in terms of investigating every possible chemo side effect and seeing what solution there could be to that side effect, particularly long-term ones like getting neuropathy in your hands and feet, which can be long-term. So to the extent that I put together a website called Here Today and Tomorrow, which is about preventing chemo side effects, because I've found out from overseas breast cancer support groups that things that are standard care in the States and also in the UK and Australia are not things that are even mentioned to New Zealand cancer patients, like icing your hands and feet to try and reduce things like your nails falling off, which sounds cosmetic, but in actual fact, your nails falling off is extremely painful and disabling to not have nails on your hands if you try to use your hands. And
it seems like they would be useful to hold on to most of the time.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that's sort of, and there was a really interesting article by a dermatologist that said that icing your hands and feet during the chemo that I had pretty much 100% prevents your nails falling off. So it's kind of like, it's not that big a deal. You can even use kind of frozen peas or a bowl with ice cubes in it. You know, it's not
that's such a simple thing.
Yeah, so it was bizarre. And like on eBay, there's all these products for icing hands and feet during chemo with kind of special molded gel packs that are kind of more comfortable than ice cubes and things. Like there's a whole industry for icing hands and feet internationally. And I think somebody told me that the Dunedin chemo unit kind of suggests icing hands and feet, but yeah, it doesn't.
It's crazy with stuff like that. It seems like it takes, like, say you're saying in Dunedin, like there's like one doctor who's like super into it and is like, oh no, this is a really good idea. And if there's not that like one super switched on engaged person in the unit, you just kind of fall down to this level of craptitude.
Having to do your own research to sort of advocate for yourself. But you being like having that medical background, was that like a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was useful because I could then take what all of the women in the States were saying all of them were doing, because it was what was suggested to them by their oncologist. And then I could go, let's see if there's actually a research basis for this. And at that point, I could find this big in-depth kind of research article, sort of a review article by a dermatologist that put together all the research for icing hands and feet, and then kind of looked at the evidence base for neuropathy, which is not as strong, but there's still more positive studies than negative. And given how disabling neuropathy in your hands and feet is, to the point that some people can no longer do their occupations, like being a surgeon, that surely anything that even might help it, I mean, the worst thing that can happen with icing your hands and feet is you might get some chilblains, or hands get very cold, but our hands are pretty good at telling us when we might need to pop out of the ice for a little breather before we go back in again. So it really is a low cost, low risk thing to ice your hands and feet with potentially very significant benefits. So I wanted New Zealand cancer patients to know that that existed and have it all just kind of sitting there, the research
So
for it.
is
rather
that
than,
your number one chemo tip?
yeah, well, I think in terms of something simple and something that is very rarely told to New Zealand chemo patients, that would probably be my number one tip of something that is usually not talked about.
So I'm a pretty heavy medical cannabis user, and my bit is they say I prescribed it to myself. I was like, weed for you. And then I gave it to my dealer, and he didn't want the prescription. Are you do you is that something you hear about a lot? Is it something you're sick of hearing about, or did you use it yourself? Did you
Yeah,
use
I
it and
mean,
were like meh, or what? How did you find it?
I mean, my main barrier, well, the two reasons why I didn't explore it, firstly, was that I didn't feel the need for it because other things were working. So I wasn't kind of at that, I need to find a solution because the medications or techniques I'm using are not working. And secondly, I've got quite a strong family history of bipolar disorder, and there's enough evidence that people who have genetic risk for bipolar disorder or psychosis have an increased risk of psychosis using cannabis. So for me personally, the risks were higher and I didn't feel a need. I mean, it may be different if I sort of developed stage 4 cancer and had kind of intractable symptoms that weren't being managed by medication, then I'd certainly kind of go, okay, what's the risk benefit now for me personally? So I do, as a psychiatrist, tend to divide people into those who can probably reasonably safely use cannabis if the need is there, and people who there's a much higher risk of them using cannabis in terms of the risk of psychosis primarily.
Having seizures, a lot of people seem to think like, oh, just smoke dope and you'll be fine. It will fix your seizures. And I went to a seminar from some American neurologist who's quite well respected, and I can't remember her name at all. But she obviously got the question, what about cannabis? And it really kind of pissed her off. She's like, everyone says that, but you only hear about the people it's worked for. You don't hear about the hundreds of people that it hasn't worked for. And like I've tried, and it doesn't help me at all. And in fact, I don't like it because I only tried like, actual cannabis, not the prescribed stuff. And when you start to get stoned, feels very much like when I'm about to have a seizure.
Yeah, so it sort of brings on a rather anxious response of this is not good.
Exactly, yeah. It doesn't chill me out at all. It makes me quite sort of edgy and like a little bit paranoid. And I think it's because normally when I have a seizure, I'm just unconscious and off I go. So there's no paranoia about it.
Yeah.
I'm aware that something's going a bit wrong. No, don't like that at all.
Well, it's that thing. I mean, for me, it was getting to that point where none of the tablets were working. None of the things the doctor's giving me were working. Okay, what's next? I'm like, okay, I'm just start eating plants and see how it goes. And it definitely, because there's so little, I guess I want to say education for want of a better words around it, and that it definitely took me a long time to get to like a balance point with it, because we all, had the Western medicine thing where it's like, oh, something's broken, I will take the pill and then I'll fix it. And I don't have to think about anything else. I just have to take the pill and just keep living, eating shit and not getting enough exercise and not taking care of myself at all, and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I did the Choices Clinic, which was a 3-week pain camp, and they were like, no, 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 no. Health is very complicated and has a lot of things to it. And
Hmm.
it's something that I think is missing even from, the doctor's stuff, where they're like, oh,
Oh,
here is the thing, here's the pill to fix that thing, instead of health is a continuum, which is where I think Chinese medicine gets a lot of stuff right, but then it also gets a lot of stuff wrong. Like, I don't
yeah.
think any of the systems that we have are really correct in understanding just how nuanced and individual our responses
Yeah.
are.
And I think that's why, a certain number of general practitioners, for example, are moving more into kind of integrated or functional medicine, to look more holistically. I mean, some of it, sort of the kind of periphery of it has some kind of questionable things scientifically, but there's a real kind of core to that in terms of mental and physical well-being, around nutritional needs, the need for enough sleep, the need for enough movement, all of those kind of things which are crucial parts of well-being, that firstly, there's often not enough time to kind of discuss that when you kind of have got somebody as a GP for 15 minutes with a complex problem. But sort of, I think it's often something that, isn't really a big part of a medical degree, to look at well-being and the kind of foundations for wellness. It's sort of immediately into pathology and this diagnosis and this treatment. And certainly when I wrote a book that was published last year for parents about teenage mental health, chapter 2 is basically about mental well-being and all those important components in terms of like bringing our cortisol levels down, in terms of all the different possibilities of how to do that, like blue space and green space and things like that are really important, as well as the sort of nutrition, sleep, exercise, and minimizing toxic substances component. Because if parents are trying to support their teenager to be well holistically, and they're sleeping 5 hours a night because they're on their phones all night, and they're kind of living on junk food, and they're an exercise regime is walking from their bedroom to the fridge and back, I mean, and they're kind of binge drinking every weekend, it doesn't really matter what parents do over and above that. The foundation of their teenager being well mentally and physically isn't there. So making sure that kind of the basics are addressed before kind of looking at more complicated solutions to things.
So many people at pain camp fail out of the course because they're not at a place where they're like, I need to take responsibility for my own life and my own health and what I'm doing. And they're just like pill, pill, pill. And then they don't end up completing the course because they just don't want to hear about it.
Yeah. There's also the other side of that is with my seizures, because the epileptic ones are pretty much under control with medication. It's the functional neurological ones, because as I said before, there's nothing can be done about them because that's from a diving accident, and hey, but you tend to then get pushed on to, well, if it's not something we can give you a pill for, then it's obviously psychological. And so I've engaged with all the psychologists, and they've all gone, yeah, your brain's, pretty good, but it's, you've got your good coping mechanisms, you don't avoid issues, you engage with things. And it's almost like, if I am not curing my seizures myself through psychological work, then it's my own fault.
And
it's
as opposed to, I have a very complicated neurological system that's misfiring kind of both kind of electrically and functionally. I'm not kind of consciously deciding that I'm going to be having functional neurological disorder and kind of being problematic and not fixing it. It's basically that whole mind-body connection is misfiring.
So your show, Jo, is Cancer and Cartwheels. Yeah. So what was it hard for you to decide to do a show about your cancer time, or were you like immediately when you were like got cancer, you were like, oh, fucking show material, ace?
Yeah, basically the latter. because I started writing in a journal the night I found out I had cancer, and I was just kind of writing down all the possible silver linings that I could focus on. And I was going, oh, maybe I can be like Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek and have a wall full of wigs. That'd be cool. And then I wrote, maybe I've got a tragic personal story for my next comedy show. So that was, on the list of possible silver linings to hang on to
Bitch and
about
wigs,
this situation.
then show. I think you
Yeah.
have your priorities.
Yeah.
So.
Then I discovered cold capping, which meant I didn't need wigs. So so I kind of moved on to comedy show.
What's cold capping?
Cold capping is, again, standard care in the NHS in the UK, offered to public health patients going through chemotherapy, and it basically lowers the temperature of your scalp so that your hair follicles go into hibernation during the actual chemo infusion, which means they're less likely to be killed by chemotherapy, and therefore your hair is less likely to fall out. And so all of the women on the Facebook groups kind of around the world were talking about their cold capping, and I said, well, what is this magic you speak of that is cold capping? And then found out, well, yeah, you can definitely kind of hire the caps from Australia and do it in New Zealand, and there's actually cold capping machines in some of the private hospitals and 2 of the public hospitals in New Zealand. So if you live in Nelson or Rotorua, you can be lucky enough in the public health system to be offered cold capping or scalp cooling machines, but otherwise you need to be a wealthy person with private health insurance to access it. So I've been agitating a bit as a patient advocate to try and make that option available to all New Zealand chemo patients rather than just the wealthy ones.
Well, as we both, Naomi and I, live in Nelson, and it is chock full of rich white people, like to the brim.
Yeah, but in Nelson, there's one in the public health system. So
because there's so many rich white people in the public health system.
It's mainly just what you mentioned earlier. There's an oncologist who trained in the UK who came to New Zealand and went, so where is the cold capping? Where's the scalp cooling machine? And there wasn't one. So she contacted the Breast Cancer Foundation and went, hey, let's do a feasibility study in New Zealand with a scalp cooling machine. And the Breast Cancer Foundation went, yeah, cool. And they fundraised $500,000 to buy 10 of these machines. And when I was last checked in, only 2 of the 10 machines are in public health units, and the $500,000 was fundraised in 2019. And I get people kind of the whole time messaging me saying they desperately want to cold cap but can't afford the thousands of dollars to do it. So so I've kind of tried to make noise about the fact that there's $500,000 sitting there that's not currently being used for this purpose, and can we brainstorm other ways to use it if it's all too hard for the public chemo suites. But
it's crazy.
It's
just one person can like turn the tide of literally like thousands of patients. It's crazy.
Oh, absolutely. So and I heard a really positive story, because people go, oh, your hair's just cosmetic, it doesn't matter. But there's quite a significant group of people who say no to chemo specifically because they can't bear the thought of losing their hair. And for those people, if they had the option of cold capping that significantly reduces hair loss with a lot of chemo drugs. There was a woman that I heard about who said no to chemo, and then she heard about the website through a friend of a friend, and then did cold capping and said yes to chemo because it made the difference to her. That was kind of the bit she needed to be able to say yes to chemo. So it can be life-saving to have this option available, and particularly for Pacifica women. I understand talking to people in that community that's a big reason why they say no to chemo and therefore have a worse survival rate. It's one of the factors. So
right. And I think as well, we're saying about the mind health cures and things.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that personal view of yourself, whether that's aesthetic or or otherwise, it really does impact the success of treatment.
Oh,
Because if you're
absolutely.
feeling that you're looking hideous and you're feeling hideous, then it's not going to have good health outcomes.
No, definitely. And I mean, I looked in the mirror and I just looked like my normal self through pretty much all of chemo. I didn't have that, people are looking at me with pity in the mall because I've got kind of my hair kind of wrapped up and I'm clearly going through chemo, so it made a big difference to me just feeling normal. I mean, my hair is very ordinary. It wasn't really about my hair as such. It was more about just wanting to feel normal and my usual self. And talking to quite a few people who decide to cold cap, that's often a big part of it. And also preserving privacy. And that was one of the reasons why the woman I mentioned before was saying no to chemo. She wanted to continue working, and if she lost her hair during chemo, everyone would know she was having chemo. So so there's quite a few factors, and people trying to protect young children, because that's often one of the hard things about losing hair for women with young children is the impact on their kids. It's very noticeable to their kids that there's something different about mummy or daddy if they're going through chemo and suddenly lose all their hair, whereas if they look normal, it's less impact on the children of kind of needing to know that mummy's sick if they're kind of too young to really process that.
Yeah, I think when you've got something that's visible to other people, they kind of automatically feel they have got a right to your medical information.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's like if somebody's had a limb amputated, people think they're entitled to say, how did you lose your limb?
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's my medical information. And it's like with having seizures when I get injuries. And then like at first when I get injuries, I used to be really kind of ashamed because, oh my God, I've got a black eye, and I'd hide it. And then I said, oh, sod it, it's going to happen. Now I embrace it. And people are like, oh, you've got a black eye. Yep. And yeah, people want to know why. And that's fair enough. But people will ask and intrude onto that. Like people ask about seizures, like, oh, what causes it? Oh, it's psychological. Oh, what happened to you? And it's like, actually, no, you don't know my history. And even the medical, like say, paramedics and stuff who come to me, they have their preconception of what my seizures are, especially with it being functional neurological disorder. But people make those assumptions about you. So like say if you have chemo and you lose your hair, people are thinking, oh no, they're having chemo, and does this mean they're going to die, or does this mean they're getting better? And they want to know. So things that you can like, sod that, just look normal.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that, I mean, I'm a very open person, but a lot of people are very private people, and they don't want people to know that they've got cancer or going through cancer treatment. They've only shared it with their very close family and friends. They don't want the general public knowing and their acquaintances knowing or their workmates knowing.
I think especially in the 21st century, when everyone is sharing so much of everything online and with your social media, and like, oh look, I'm eating soup, like to be able to hold on to something that's like, no, this is my little corner that no one else gets to come into.
Yeah, exactly. And people have different bubbles. Some people are incredibly private people and want to maintain that, and that's very valid.
And then some people go the other way and make a whole damn podcast.
Yeah, I'm gonna say everything kind of social media, this podcast. Yeah.
And see, one of the things I will talk about seizures is because it is this kind of taboo, and people don't want to people do want to know, but they also are sort of nervous about what your reaction will be. So I am so open about it, and I want people ask you questions, don't have your misconceptions, don't have your judgments on what's going on. And so I do a fair amount of theatre and stuff, and one of the first things in rehearsals when it's like a bunch of new people or a bunch of kids is I've got a really good director, and she's like, okay, Nay, tell everyone what's up with you. And so I'll tell people, this is what I might do, this is how you might be able to tell, and this is your job to look after me, this is what you have to do. And it stops that being an issue, particularly with kids. Like when I've had seizures at the theatre, and some of the kids will be like, oh, a thing happened and I'm really scared. But it's so nice the next day to go in and go, so kids, any questions? I'm not possessed. I'm fine.
I'm back again. All good.
Yeah. And it becomes kind of just normalized. And then people can ask those questions.
With Lewis, I was talking about inviting you to a thing, and Lewis is my son. And he goes, what if Nay has a seizure? And it's like, oh, well, then we'll take care of her. And he's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
like it's that simple.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful thing to try and break down the stigma about seizures. You know, if people can witness one, see what they need to do, see that you come back the next day. Oh yeah, seizures, that's just a thing. That's what some
We've been
people
trying to
have.
get her to seize on the podcast since we started, and she stubbornly won't.
Well, what I need to do is I need to not sleep the night before. I need to drink no water. I need to crank the heating up and then start worrying about things. And then
Yeah.
fingers crossed,
Just
we'll try
like
and have one.
perfect. Yeah. The
Well, me
perfect
and Steve,
storm.
yeah,
Yeah.
me and Steve were talking about, potentially getting, you know, a webcam in the house and having that running full time. So that, you know, if I catch a seizure on camera, content, you're saying about
Yes.
oversharing that you're having your bowl
Yeah.
of soup. It's like, yeah, let's just film my lounge for
Yes.
content.
So it's like, and here we have Naomi doing a seizure. Over to you, Naomi. Yeah.
Well, see, this is the thing. I've never watched myself. Like, I've never had a video of myself, even though I tell everybody to film me if I have one, you know. I've never seen myself have a seizure, and I don't know how I'd feel about it. I don't know if that'd be I don't know if I'd be intrigued or if I'd be freaked. Would it be weird? In your experience as a doctor and you know, a brain doctor, how do you think I'd cope with that? Do you think that would be a weird or
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had much experience in terms with seizures as such. I certainly see a lot of people with other trauma responses like dissociative switching and things like that. So they'll be in dissociative states when they're triggered by trauma and be behaving in quite a different way. And the impact of people watching themselves behaving, you know, like 7-year-old them or behaving like a French lady or, you know, a whole range of things is quite variable. Some people find it fascinating and validating to their internal experience that, yes, this is actually a thing, and other people completely freak out, especially if they don't have much awareness of it. So, you know, huge range of experiences.
See, I do like after I've had a seizure that, you know, say friends with me, I like to get a debriefing of tell me everything that happened, tell me what I did, tell me what the paramedics did, that. And part of
I
that
think it would be good for you.
thing. Well, see,
I reckon.
I like hearing about what happened because it's like I have done something in the world in life and I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
And all that information of where I was, what I was doing beforehand, you know, how I was acting and all that. It's kind of reclaiming control because everybody knows something about me and I want it as
you
well.
want to know it. Yeah. And it also just
Yeah.
fills in that gap in time from when you felt the seizure coming on to when you woke up, of kind of, you know, I've got a gap in my life story that I would like to kind of know the details of what kind of happened in that
And
gap.
sometimes it's a little bit amusing.
Like so many times you wake up and you're like, oh, my shoulder's dislocated. And I think for you to have context for that, that's like in you, and it's like, oh, now this thing makes just that smidge more sense.
Yeah, like I slipped over like that, and that's why I dislocated my shoulder, because I kind of caught the side of the sofa as I was falling down, or, you know, things like that, just to kind of go, okay, right, now I know the story of that injury.
Well, there's sometimes when the paramedics come and they're supposed to leave, if they leave me at home, they leave an ACS form, which is, I can't remember what it stands for. Something care summary.
Actual cunting spaz.
Yeah, actual cunting spaz completely. But they leave that. So yeah, it's got the time and, you know, you can access information about it. And so if they leave one of those, it's good because they might say that I was chatting and everything was normal. I don't remember that.
Yeah. So
and so
sort of chatting in a sort of post-ictal haze.
Yeah. But I'm very good at masking. So I present very much normal. You know, like, oh, she's just chatting, everything's fine. But it's, you know, I don't remember that. Or as soon as they're out the door, my mask drops and I'm like, oh, okay, now I can collapse again. But sometimes the only way that I know that I've had a seizure is I wake up and see the form on the kitchen counter and I'm like, oh, what's this? Oh, did I? You know, so they don't always leave one because they're always here and I just be able to wallpaper my lounge with them. But it's actually quite handy when they do. Just
because then, you know, if you've just kind of drifted back into normal life post-ictally, you can kind of go, oh, okay,
I mean,
that's why I'm a bit sore on my right side. I was wondering why I was a bit kind of
I mean, if I wake up on the lounge floor, that's normally a giveaway that something's happened. But yeah, not always. Sometimes just fall asleep. But it's like, those missing gaps in your life. It's quite nice to have that information.
Yeah, I even found that, like, I had a friend who's a documentary maker film kind of a day in the life of someone going through chemotherapy with me, and because I'd taken a lorazepam tablet to help with the kind of icing hands and feet and cold capping just to be a bit more chill, I was fairly amnesic about the whole chemotherapy day. There were only like little flickers of things, and I was watching a really detailed hour-long interview with me that I was very coherent, talking about all sorts of subjects that I have no recollection of at all. And it was quite bizarre going, okay, so that's what I did that chemotherapy day. That's very patchy.
Yeah, that's
Remarkably coherent for complete amnesia. Um,
that's so weird. Like the other day that I had a seizure here and I'd been drugged and taken to hospital, I don't remember anything until waking up in hospital. And one of the guys that they gave me a lift home and said that I've been doing research into an old family home, and so I had, you know, like floor plans and the sale histories and things. And one of the things at this house, I had a tree that's protected, like a protection order on this tree. And apparently I was having a seizure, they drugged me and I came out of it and then went into another seizure and they drugged me some more and took me away. But he said in between the seizures, I sat up and I was chatting all about this history of the house and about this tree protection order and the history of that. And I'm like, did I?
Nothing,
Like,
yeah.
how did I talk about such, you know, an official type thing and official documents and historic things? I've got no recollection of that. What a good brain.
Yes, that it can kind of be remarkably coherent when it's not kind of anchored into any memory system. It's
Yeah.
And I just wanted to talk a little bit about Jo's show a little bit more.
Yeah, because I'm doing my show Cancer and Cartwheels as part of the New Zealand Comedy Festival on the 14th of May. So that's kind of Tuesday week in Wellington. So it's the first time I've done the show in the North Island. So very excited about that. So got and I do something where people who have had breast cancer or are currently going through treatment, that I give them free tickets as well. So I've last Saturday, so 2 nights ago, I did the show in Christchurch and had a large group of people who were pink sisters who'd gone through breast cancer treatment or were in the middle of it. And yeah, it was really wonderful doing the show because it's a nice upbeat kind of hopeful show, most of it, but also some very real messages about healthcare inequality and the pink washing of breast cancer with all the pink ribbons and tutus, when cancer is often a lot of loneliness and anger and grief and emotions like that, rather than sort of pink froth. And that there's quite a toxic positivity narrative around breast cancer, and quite possibly a lot of other illnesses where it's all about being kind of a brave warrior, kind of fighting this condition.
I think that's because it makes it easier for people who don't have the conditions to palate. They're like, well, if I had the thing, I would just be a really brave warrior and I would fight really hard and I wouldn't be sick, because things like that don't happen.
Yeah, and we had that with Anna before, when people go, oh, you can fight this and you warrior. It's almost like if you continue to die from it, you're just not trying hard enough.
Yeah, you lost the fight. You kind of, you know, lost the battle. Kind of cancer
just
won.
Try harder not to die.
Yeah, you weren't quite a brave, or you were a brave warrior till the end, but cancer kind of put the final stab in. So yeah, and I think that makes it really hard for people to express their true emotions if there's a lot of this sort of toxic positivity going around of just be brave and positive. So yeah, can be sometimes, can also be very sad and very angry and very isolated and all sorts of other emotions, and would like to be able to express those as well, please.
That's one of the reasons why the podcast is good. Come on here and moan and whinge about all the crap. We've heard all the good stuff. We want the nasty stuff, the gross
yes,
stuff.
the kind of the gritty backstory. And yeah, and I guess I want to try and kind of empower other people to be able to be real with their emotions, and also for people who are kind of supporting people going through chronic illness to be aware that all of this kind of just think positive kind of narrative can actually be harmful if people feel kind of guilty that they're not being brave and positive. It actually makes their situation worse. So it's not a benign thing to just say, just be positive, because then people, if they feel like they can't just be positive in that moment, kind of feel, oh, you know. I think the difficulty is people often think that they can just bypass steps from very distressed person to nice positive kind of thoughts and being in a great mind space by just saying be like that, whereas that isn't actually the process that most people need to, you know, they need to be able to feel the emotion they're feeling, to be able to express it for other people to validate that they're feeling that way, and then to feel supported, and then work towards being able to have sort of optimism and silver linings and all of that kind of thing, but also realizing that people are very rarely continuously in that state of mindful optimism and silver linings. You know, most people have troughs, and that's allowed. You don't, you know, but if people don't feel like they can, then they kind of stifle that and they pretend. And the problem with pretending is that our cortisol level stays just as high as being very distressed. You know, like with toddlers, for example, the ones who kind of separate from their parents with a cheery goodbye and go and kind of play with the Lego, their heart rates, their cortisol is just as high as the kid that's screaming and holding onto mum and dad's legs. Their separation anxiety is just as high, but they've got the avoid those emotions, put on the happy smiley face and everybody will be fine, but their distress levels are just as high. And so that's the problem with kind of fake positivity, as opposed to going, it's okay to feel sad when mummy and daddy leave, big hugs, you know, be real, and then you sort of can go off and play. And it's the same with people with chronic illness. If you're not allowed to kind of express distress, then you can't have that feeling validated, actually bringing your cortisol stress levels down, and then working towards kind of mindfulness and, you know, mindfulness and optimism.
When I was, before I'd been to pain camp, and I was really struggling with what this was and how my body was working and stuff, and I was talking to one of my meditation teachers, and I was like, oh, you know, I've fallen off the horse, but I need to get back up and get on it and do this thing. He's like, dude, you fell off a horse, lay on the ground for a minute, then you can start thinking about getting back up. And I was like, oh, that makes
it is good being around people who have got chronic things and issues, because we all get it. So if you're having a down day or a down time, it's like, oh yeah, you haven't broken, you just have normal times. Because with me, people go like, oh, you know, you're brave and all that kind of crap, and then they seem surprised when you're having a down day, because oh, I thought you dealt with everything.
Yeah, I thought you were brave now, kind of.
Yeah.
Just
It's like, no,
I still go on a bit of a roller coaster. Brave catch, really shit. You know?
Exactly. And so I'm quite open, you know, like obviously doing podcasts, I'm quite open about everything. So people can kind of understand that it is that kind of flow. And especially because I can be feeling good, I'm coping with the world and all that's going on, and then have a seizure, and then it's like, boom, now I feel crap. You know, especially, you know, the sort of 24 hours afterwards. And it's like, during that time, I'm not strong, I'm not upbeat, I'm not positive. And, you know, I still get out and do stuff, but I feel like shit.
Yeah.
And I think the good thing about talking about it and being open about it is that it gives other people the opportunity to say, oh, I feel shit too. We don't all have to have that. We don't all have to be coping all the time. It doesn't mean that we're broken and we're going to stay down.
Yeah.
We're a bit broken for a while.
Yeah, no, so I definitely feel as the kind of express true emotions, be validated by others, that's fair enough, then kind of come to acceptance that there's some degree of negative feelings that happen, and then you kind of move forward with, how am I going to cope with this? What are my strategies? You know, let's sort of find silver linings, gratitude, mindfulness, all that kind of thing. But you can't just shove that on a distressed person without those kind of other steps. So, so kind of positivity is great, but there's kind of a few steps to get there rather than just be positive.
Cool. Well, that's great. So where else can people find you and follow you and find out all your shenanigans?
Probably the kind of simplest place is drjoprendergast.com, because that's kind of now my kind of one website. But I've got various profiles for cancer and cartwheels that are about my cancer experience. And then there's kind of Jo Prendergast comedy on both Insta and Facebook that has my range of comedy things. And then I've got a Dr. Jo author page about my When Life Sucks book, and I've got a Here Today and Tomorrow page about my chemotherapy side effects. So yeah, there's a lot, and I think that kind of suggests the kind of multi-project space I've been in as one of my coping mechanisms of, oh, something bad's happened, how many projects can I do during this process as a coping mechanism? So yeah, so many projects, many Facebook pages at the moment.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, well, that's been
I'll put a bunch of links in the description so people can go and check those out.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out and having a chat, Dr. Jo Prendergast.
But been so lovely to talk to you both.
Yeah.
Very nice to kind of meet you in this context. And yes, would love to chat again sometime.
Yeah, we'll break a leg for Comedy Fest.
Yes, and I will also see you at Edinburgh Fringe, probably, kind of floating around in Edinburgh for the whole month. So our paths are likely to cross.
What we should do maybe next year is take a full spazzed flotilla.
Yeah, sounds good.
Kiwi,
Like all the disabled
shows.
New Zealand artists with all their shit are kind of going to Edinburgh. Yeah.
Now that's some fucking content. Get a documentary crew, get 6 people with disabilities, and
and kind of
throw them in the mix.
Yes, and like the whole trip to Edinburgh.
Going to cost us a lot in health insurance for that.
Yes, no, sounds good. Well, lovely chatting to you.
All right, you too. Have a good day,
See you
Jo.
later. Bye bye.